Hello, participant. Good morning. It's my great pleasure and with gratefulness, I wish to introduce my own mentor and teacher. I am his pride student. He has been at IIT Delhi for long inning. I am reading his formal biography. Professor C.P. Ravi Kumar is presently the technical director of Technical Talent Development at Texas Instruments, Bangalore, India. He leads the TI India Technical University, which provides learning opportunities to employees of TI India. His earlier roles in TI include Director of University Relations and Senior Technologist for VLSI testing. He is also adjunct faculty at IIT Madras currently. Before joining TI in 2001, he was Professor of Electric Engineering at IIT Delhi during about more than 10 years. He also held visiting positions at University of Southern California, 95-96, the position of Vice President Training at ControlNet India, Goa, 2001. He obtained his PhD in Computer Engineering from University of Southern California in 1991, Masters in Computer Science with highest score from IISc, Bangalore, and B in Electronics with gold medal from Bangalore University in 83, long back. He has published more than 200 papers in leading international conferences and reputed journals. He has founded the VLSI Design and Test workshops, for which I was fortunately part and contributed my little bit in that along with him in initial years. And he has taken that to a great height. And now it is independent event that way. And he was general chair of this event for 15 years, since inception in 1998 till 2011. He is author and editor of 12 books in VLSI domain. He has contributed several chapters for many books. He is editor of the Journal of VLSI and Electronic System Design. He is on editorial board of Journal of Electronic Testing, very reputed journal for field of testing, theory and applications, and Journal of Low Power Electronics. He has won Best Paper Award at IEEE International Conference on VLSI Design, a very reputed conference outside US in its own standing. In 2002, VLSI Test Symposium 2005. He is senior member of IEEE, honorary secretary of IEEE Circuits and System Bangalore chapter from 2004 to currently, which he has founded, and he is actively taking this chapter to greater heights. He is honorary secretary. He has been honorary secretary of VLSI Society of India till 2011 for 8 years. He has received award from Zinnov for his work on ecosystem development in India. I hand over to Ravi Kumar sir to carry on the talk back. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you,
welcome,
Vineet,
sir.
And it's a pleasure to be part of this activity. I congratulate MNIT and in particular Dr. Sahula for taking leadership in organizing this kind of a summer internship program. And I think the fact that you are able to reach out to such a large number of people is impressive. Let me sort of start. See, I am sure you have already had a little bit of an exposure to digital VLSI design. Professor Sahula tells me that you have been given a little bit of an exposure. So I will just do a little bit of a recap here, right? So remember that today digital design is based on what is called as IP cores, right? Or means intellectual property core, right? So if you see an SOC today, right? So if we have an SOC, right? Inside that, what are the kinds of things you might see? You might see, let us say, a CPU. It is what we call as an embedded processor today. It is embedded inside an SOC, right? In addition to that, you might see, let us say, a memory core. And the different kinds.
Sir, I'm sorry. I'm muting all, sir. Please unmute little later. Sir, I'm muting all. Please unmute yourself a little later, sir. Sir, please unmute yourself. I'm sorry for disturbance.
Now I'm okay?
You are audible, sir. Please. Sorry for disturbance.
Yeah, no problem. See, in order to build a complete system on a chip, you will need an EEPROM. Typically, it has the boot code and stuff like that. Then you may need a little bit of a RAM. Right? And in modern devices, they also use, instead of an EEPROM, they may use either a flash memory, right? Or they may use what is called as FRAM. FRAM stands for ferroelectric RAM. So you will find different kinds of memory, right? If it is a microprocessor, you may find static RAM, and also sometimes they will embed DRAM, right? But a lot of times DRAM is outside. It is present outside here. And in order to communicate with the memory, you may require a memory interface, right? So there may be a interface between the memory and the DRAM, right? Then there may be peripherals. See, today we always want to remain connected, right? So you may require connectivity peripherals, right? It may be a communication peripheral, serial communication peripheral. It may be a maybe a USB drive, right? So all kinds of connectivity, both wired connectivity, wireless connectivity. So there'll be a lot of these peripherals. So let me just write it as peripherals. Not audible? Oh, I'm so sorry. Now it's visible. Visible? Oh, okay. I apologize. I heard that my slides were not visible.
If you want to put them in slideshow mode, you can put it. F5.
Yeah. I'm drawing as I go along, so that is why I have kept it like that.
Sorry to disturb you.
So this is an SRC, right? And remember, there can be an embedded CPU inside. Modern days, you may have as small as maybe 16-bit processors, right? There can be 32-bit and even 64-bit processors. As a general knowledge, you should know that today TI may sell a SoC device, right? But it is not necessary that we design each and every part, right? So we may license the CPU, intellectual property, right? CPU is an intellectual property, and we may just acquire that intellectual property by paying a license fee. So, for example, ARM is a company that sells this CPU IP, right? And similarly, memory, right? We may not really design memories inside TI. We will just pay a licensing fee, and there are companies, again, ARM is one of them. Like that, there are many companies that provide these intellectual properties. Then there are peripherals, like I was telling you. So they may be memory, various device controllers, right? USB controller is an example of a peripheral device, right? Similarly, there could be a memory controller like a DMA controller, etc. Then there may be some systems peripherals, right? Again, a DMA controller is perhaps a good example of a cache controller, right? This memory may be hierarchically organized. It is not necessary that we have one single block called RAM. We may have multiple levels of hierarchy. Some memories are faster than others, etc. So you can see that there is a lot of IP that goes into a SoC today, and you see even CPU, right? It is possible that it is a multi-core device. I may have more than one CPU. So it's here I have a dual core kind of a system going on, and I can have four, etc. And there is a lot of interconnection that is required. The CPU may require to access the memory. Both the CPUs will require access to memory. So you may need a way to share this memory between devices, right? And there may be an opportunity for CPU to talk to maybe other CPUs, right? There may be a CPU may require to talk to a peripheral, right? So there is a on-chip interconnect, right? See, sometimes it may be a bus-based interconnect, right? But if that is not scaling, then it will be a sort of a switch-based interconnect and so on. So there is a lot of complexity going on here, right? As though that is not enough, right? We also need an ability to sort of test these devices, right? So I'm going to use three terminology today, right? I'm going to use the terminology verification. I'm going to use the term validation. I'm going to use the word testing. Okay, these are three different terminologies I'm going to use, and I want you to understand that these are all different, right? So they look the same, right? They all in real life we may just refer to them in the same way, but they are slightly different. So see, when I have designed this chip in Verilog or system Verilog, right? At that point of time, what do we have? It is just a soft IP. It is a piece of code, right, that exists on my hard disk, nothing more. I don't really have any manufactured chip in my hand. So at this point of time, I can do what is called as verification, right? What is it that we verify? We are worried that there may be design errors, right? So a good analogy is, see, suppose you are writing your thesis, right? So when you write your thesis, it is your intellectual property. You may have divided it into several chapters, just like I divided this SoC into a number of peripherals. You may have chapter 1, chapter 2, etc., etc. And it is possible that different people wrote them, because you may be a group of 5 people writing a single thesis. Each of you is writing a different part of the thesis, right? And when you put them all together, it is possible that the whole thing, has some problems, right? There may be repetitions, there may be missing information. Someone thought that there will be a reference provided, but that reference is missing. So what do? You normally give it to your professor, right? How many students read their own thesis? Most of them don't, right? They give it to the professor and expect the professor will figure out all the problems. So the professor is doing a verification, right? The professor reads it from cover to cover and points out various bugs that may be there. Hey, you never gave this reference, right? Or here is a typographical error, right? Please correct it. This grammar is not correct. So these are all examples of design errors. In the same way, in our chip, we may be committing all kinds of design errors, human errors, right? Maybe the bus from CPU to RAM, it was supposed to be most significant bit to least significant bit in a certain way, and we made an incorrect connection, right? The MSB may be connected to the LSB of the memory or something like that, or some wires were not even connected, right? Or incorrect routing. Maybe I made a mistake when I connected the various ports, right? All kinds of interface errors could occur, and that is where we have to be careful, right? These are called bugs. They are called functional bugs, right? Because the chip will not function correctly. The functionality will be incorrect, right? And as you can imagine, if I have a chip for something complicated, like let us say a microprocessor today or a microcontroller today,
Hello. Hello. नहीं पता. हेलो सर, रवि कुमार सर का मोबाइल नंबर मिल सकता है? शायद उनकी आवाज़ फिर से चली गई. हाँ ठीक है, थैंक यू. हेलो रवि सर.
I hope you can all hear me now, Vineet. I hope
Yes
this.
sir. Yes sir, we can hear you sir. Sir,
All.
this is Amit Joshi from MNIT Jaipur sir.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Fine sir, fine sir. Sir, we can hear you. Please go ahead sir.
Okay. So functional verification is a way to verify that there are no bugs. Okay, the kind of bugs which I talked about earlier, incorrect connections, missing connections, and things like that. Then what happens is once we are satisfied with the functionality, right? At some stage, we will go ahead and do a synthesis, right? Different blocks will be synthesized, right? And then there will be a physical design, right? And the physical design means actual placement and routing. None of that had happened earlier. I hope you understood that. So when we are doing verification, we were playing with just RTL code, right? There was no nothing, no wires were there, nothing was there, right? So at that stage, we verified for functional bugs. Later, after we do the synthesis, we will have some gates in place, right? And it is a way to realize the functionality that you are trying to put into the chip. And then when you do the physical design, that is when the wires first appear, right? Till then, there was nothing real there, right? At that point, unfortunately, there may be problems that you had not foreseen before. For example, some wires may be longer than they should be, and as a result, the system may not work at the speed at which you expected it to work, right? So synthesis, had done its duty by trying to put a certain kind of gate. There are different kinds of gates in the library, right? There may be NAND gates, NOR gates, and or invert gates. The synthesis tool tries to pick the right realization of the gates, right? But in spite of the effort made by the synthesis tool, the physical design may not be able to meet the timing. Okay, so there may be timing errors. Okay, and then there could be what are called as design rule errors, right? Maybe two wires are too close to one another, or maybe a wire is too thin and it may not reproduce properly when you manufacture the chip. All these kind of design rule errors may be there, electrical rule violations may be there, right? Nowadays, you're integrating analog also, right? I have not shown here any analog blocks, but it is quite possible that you may have some, sensor, you may have an A to D controller, right? All those may also be present in a modern system on a chip, right? So there may be electrical rule violations, right? Maybe some, analog wires are running too close to some digital signals, and that may be a violation of a sort of a electrical rule. There may be many such electrical rules that we have to check. These are called DRC and ERC. DRC stands for design rule check. ERC stands for electrical rule check. So after doing verification, synthesis, and physical design, we have to do what is called as timing verification. And only when all of those pass, we are allowed to go ahead and try to actually make a chip, right? So there will be a lot of strict checking at every stage, because you see there are so many, there is a lot of investment in making a chip today, right? It costs millions of dollars to make these masks and make a chip. And you definitely don't want it to have any functional bugs when it comes out, because that will be a disaster, right? So as a result, we need to do a lot of work on functional verification, right? Like I said, there are other verifications, like some people call it timing verification, right? Some people also talk about design rule verification, right? The layout rules, right? Physical verification, right? What if some IP is completely missing, right? Or what if it is something is present which should not be present, right? These are also problems these days, because the whole thing is outsourced to so many different parties, and there is a possibility that somebody is inserting something that should not be put there, right? Maliciously, somebody may be inserting some material or some IP which should not be present, right? So these are all things that we need to do verification for. And then the chip goes to the first manufacturing, which we, at that point, we only get a sample, right? Please don't think that we'll immediately make millions of them. That is a misunderstanding. And then when the sample comes back, we have to first validate it. Okay, that is called validation. And at that point of time, what are we checking? Despite all our efforts in verification, there may still be some problems in getting the performance that we were looking for. There may be some timing problems that we may see, or we may find some reliability problems, or we may find other maybe performance related issues, right? So power could be one of them, right? Maybe dissipation is more than what we anticipated, right? So these are things that a validation engineer will work on. And I wanted to alert all of you that see, these are very important functions. I don't know. It is telling me that my network is having some issue. Can you confirm that you can hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you, sir.
Okay, good. So the validation engineer, right, will run what are called as he will have a bench setup. Okay, this guy he has all kinds of test equipment on his desk, right? Oscilloscopes, right? Stuff like that. Then that person may be
Hello, sir. Ravi Kumar, sir. Hello, sir. हेलो, हाँ, रवि कुमार सर, मैं अमित बोल रहा हूँ सर, अमित जोशी, MNIT। हाँ हाँ सर, probably we are not able to hear you sir on that Google Meets.
Now you can hear me, right?
Yes sir, we can hear you.
No, in between my internet unfortunately doesn't, okay,
It's okay sir, it's okay.
okay. So what I wanted to tell you is all of you are interns, right? And clearly you are curious to know what kind of work happens in the industry and so on. So I told you about IP, right? All these peripherals, CPU, RAM, etc. So there are come into designing these peripherals, and verification is a big part of it, right? So there is a lot of activity on verification, right? So a lot of jobs typically are in the area of verification. Similarly, validation engineers are those who have to sit with all these samples that they get, and they must know how to use good lab equipment. Like I said, there may be a spectrum analyzer or an oscilloscope. So they must be good at using these lab equipment and see how these samples are doing, right? And they must be able to work with the design team to get those problems out, right? Um, then unfortunately, let us say we finally, get an okay saying, yeah, this chip is all right, there is no problem, and we send it out for, let us say, manufacturing. At this stage, let us say we are doing mass manufacturing, we are ramping up, right? So when we ramp up, unfortunately, you see, each chip will come out differently, right? I hope all of you know this. There is a lot of variance or variation in the manufacturing processes, right? The You have heard of PTV variations, right? The process variations. It is not that all the chips will be identical. That is not true. Maybe long ago it used to be true, but in today's technology that is not true. So it is possible that some chips will have even some defects in them. Some wire may be open, some wire may be short circuited to another wire, and so on. And this is not a functional bug. This is a manufacturing error. And we had to go and isolate those chips which have those kind of problems and throw them away, right? Because we don't want to sell a bad part to a customer, right? So that is called quality, right? So that is what is done by people who are into testing, right? So there are these functions, and I hope all of you that it is not just design, right? Design is definitely one big part, and then doing things like synthesis, physical design, those are all design functions. But in addition to that, there is a lot of verification, validation, and testing that happens, and these are often students are not aware of these opportunities.
Hello sir. Hello. Hello, sir.
I'm sorry, I keep getting kicked out of the meeting regularly, but I am very persistent, so I keep coming back, right? So hope you can, I'll share my slides.
Yes, sir.
Can you see my slide now, Amit?
No. Yes, sir. Now we can see, sir.
Yeah.
Please, sir. Okay.
So let us now move on. I hope I have clarified the roles of verification, validation, and test. So in this class, I guess you have already been exposed to a little bit of Verilog, right?
Yes, sir.
So Verilog is a hardware description language, and also it was beginning to get used as a verification language, right? So you require two kinds of Verilog files. There are the design files and there are the test benches, right? So you see what happens is, right, there are some design files, right? So there may be cpu.v, right? And then there may be maybe a peripheral.v, etc. There may be so many files like that, and typically, the way it works in any industries, one person will not do all the design activity. It will be a group effort. A lot of different people are involved in designing, and when people independently design, right, often they make certain assumptions about how the other person may be coding or what assumptions that person may be making, and these assumptions may unfortunately contradict, right? We may have made contradicting assumptions. Let us say about initialization of some variable. A person who is writing one particular piece of Verilog code may assume that this has been already initialized, but that may not have been the case, right? So these are design files, right? And somebody has to write what is called as a test bench. And that is also a Verilog file. And it will instantiate these things, right? I may create one instance of CPU and another instance of a peripheral. If I'm designing a multi-core, I may have multiple instances of a CPU and so on. And what is my test bench going to do? It is going to pretend that the chip is going to be doing something useful, right? It will create a test case, okay, as though this chip is being really used in practice, okay, and some inputs will be provided, right? And we know how the CPU should behave if it was designed correctly, and we sort of know what the answers are, right? And we verify, and we do what is called as a simulation, right? And we compare the the expected response with the actual response, and if they are not the same, we conclude that there is something wrong, and they will have to debug it, right? So usually the verification engineer's role, right, is not to design, right? This person, there is a sort of a separation here, right? There is a separation like this, and this person only sees what are called as black boxes. Okay, he gets this CPU. He only knows the CPU from an input-output standpoint of view, right? He doesn't know how it is designed inside. It is not his job to know that, right? It is supposed to work in a certain way. If I let us take a CPU, how does the CPU do? What does the CPU do? It has maybe a program counter which will be reset when you pull the reset pin, and then it is supposed to increment that program counter, and then it is supposed to fetch the instruction. So there is we know how the CPU behaves, right? And we have to verify whether it is behaving the way it is supposed to behave, right? That is what the test bench writer or the verification engineer is expected to do. And the debugging part is usually left to this designer, right? This fellow's job is only to report what problems he sees or she sees, and the design engineer will then have to debug. And sometimes it is not easy to debug because we don't know where the error is. It is because CPU has a problem or a peripheral has a problem. So debugging itself is a little bit of a art by itself, right? And another thing that you should all understand is that today we have a large number of cores, right? And there may be all kinds of cores in my design. And the specs on power and performance may be very stringent. So all these are resulting in a huge amount of state space explosion, right? And we talk about something called as coverage. What is coverage? See, suppose my design can do a million different things, right? It has a million different features, let us say, right? I can write down each of them in some notebook saying when this signal is given, this is what it is supposed to do, and this is what the output should look like. Now, clearly, right, if you look at your laptop, right, it's a system, right? You can do so many different things with it, right? At some point of time, you may be using PowerPoint and Excel. You may be using this, this Microsoft software that we are using right now. Along with that, you are using PowerPoint. So we don't know. Sometimes, a particular combination of these tasks may create a bug, right? Or it may expose a bug that we did not know about, right? So there can be a huge number of combinations out there, right? Millions of them. In fact, it will be so large that we can't possibly count them. So the verification engineer cannot possibly write all the test cases. There may be too many. So the job of the verification engineer is to write a intelligent set of test benches, right? And usually it will be a team effort. It will also not be a single person. There may be actually, the verification team for a large SOC maybe 50-60 people may be involved in that verification. So they will also partition their work, right? And there may be some people who verify individual IP. Okay, when I'm verifying the CPU, I'm going to assume that the peripherals are all good, right? When I'm verifying the peripheral, I assume that the CPU is all good. But then when somebody also has to integrate everything and run some system level verification also, because when you put things together, sometimes they may not work, right? Because the assumptions have been violated, right? So all these are part of verification, right? So tools are evolving, right? Verilog, before Verilog came, people used to use low-level simulators, right? Things like SPICE, etc. Designs used to be small, but these things didn't work when the systems became larger. So today, SPICE simulation is only done for very small units like maybe gates and things like that, or analog ICs. So SPICE simulation is also sometimes called analog simulation. Whereas as the design abstraction goes up, right? When I say design abstraction, you see, when you are designing a analog circuit, you are talking about transistors and capacitors and resistors. Whereas when you design at the gate level, you're talking about Boolean algebra. You're talking about truth tables, state tables, and things like that. Then you can even go to a next level. You can talk about algorithms and things like that, communication protocols. So different people have different levels of abstraction. So even in verification, people have moved up, this levels of abstraction. And today, for the kind of systems that we are designing, it became apparent that Verilog is not going to be sufficient, right? So we need to create something more powerful, because verification code itself will be very complicated, right? And it will be terrible if I am pointing out errors which are not there. See, because there are bugs in the verification itself, it is complaining that there is a bug in the system, but there may not be any bug. So that could happen, right? The other thing that could happen is there is a bug in the system and we are missing it completely, right? That is because our coverage was not sufficient, right? So coverage, I may have forgotten to mention what that is. So if there are a million different, possible things that can occur, right? And we have written, let us say, for 500,000 such test cases, then my coverage is 50%, right? And very difficult to assess this test coverage, right, or the verification coverage. So people try to come up with tools for finding out how good your verification is and things like that, right? So that is the background. System Verilog was introduced a few years ago. Actually, it was introduced more than 10 years ago, but it took a little while for industry to accept it. And now I think it is very much part of many organizations. It borrows features from a number of languages, right? It is mostly a verification language, right? So please understand, its main use is verification. It uses object-oriented, features, programming features. All those is not meant for synthesis, right? It is mainly used for verification, right? So these are some of the aspects that it has. It has, of course, the module feature, which you are familiar from Verilog, right? In addition to that, it has a powerful construct called interface, right? So I can describe a bus interface, for example, right? I can say, hey, this ARM uses a bus called AMBA bus, and that bus, what does it look like? So earlier, before this interface feature came along, people had to actually describe that interface separately in this module and in the other module. There are two modules, let us say CPU and memory, and we are describing the same bus in two different places. So obviously, there can be problems, right? When you duplicate something, invariably, people will make mistakes and a lot of errors will occur. So by isolating the interface away, and then allowing people to reuse that interface in various modules, we are trying to reduce the possibility of bugs, right? So that's a new feature. And then there are built-in ways to improve coverage, right? And like I already told you, object-oriented features are thrown in, and then assertions were also present in Verilog to some extent, but these have been improved. So what is an assertion? Sometimes in verification, right? See, suppose you are given a problem in trigonometry, or let us say you are doing some engineering, your teacher has given you a problem to solve in, let us say something to do with power analysis, something like that. And at some point, suppose you are getting sine theta equal to 1.1, right? Something is wrong, right? I mean, sine cannot be more than 1, right? Or let us say a particular angle is coming out to be negative, and it should never be negative. It should always be positive, right? So you can put certain conditions in your code saying, if I am seeing sine or cos to be not in the range -1 to +1, something has gone wrong, right? So then you have to go back and recheck what has gone wrong. Similarly, if an angle was supposed to be positive, but it has come out to be negative, you can assert, you can put an assertion that angle should be positive, right? So those assertions will help you in debugging, right? You can try to isolate where the problem is, right? Then there is a randomization concept. See, random number generation or generation of random signals is very important for testing, right? Or rather, when you write these test cases, right? For example, if you are trying to, let us say, a test in ALU, right? So you need some random data, right? You want to add some numbers or subtract one random number from another random number. So generation of random numbers is going to be very important because we can't do exhaustive verification, right? But when we do so, we can always select a range in which these random numbers can exist, or we can select, see, if you don't say anything, random numbers usually come from a uniform distribution, right? If I say generate a random number in the range 0 to 1, then all the numbers in the range 0 to 1 are equally probable, right? But if I want, slightly higher probability for numbers in the range 0 to 0.2, right? And a different probability distribution for 0.2 to 0.5 and so on. So that kind of a, maybe it's more realistic, right? So maybe you are doing some, you are verifying an image processor of some kind, right? And you happen to know that most pixels are black or something like that. So you can try to create random numbers with a certain known distribution. So that is what this constraint randomization is all about. Right? So I try to give you a couple of examples I have about an hour now, so I'll try to give you some examples. I don't think we can do any real, I can't demonstrate anything to you today because of the time, but I can try to give you some examples. So here is a very simple majority voter, right? What is a majority voter? I hope you know what it is. So here is a block. Okay, it requires 5 inputs, right? So it's a combinational logic. Okay, it's a combinational logic. What is its output? Its output is, true or false, depending on how many, of them are saying true and how many are saying false. So it is like there are 5 friends, right? Each of them is going to vote, whether I should attend Ravi Kumar's class or not, right? If 3 or more say yes, let us attend Ravi Kumar's class, this will say true, right? If 3 or more say no, we don't want to attend Ravi Kumar's class, this will say false, right? Something like that. So this is known as a majority voter. 3 to 1 is very common, right? Where do we use them? It is used in fault tolerance, right? See, sometimes we are worried that defects may develop in some of these blocks that we are using. So we can use what is called as triple modulo redundancy. See, I may duplicate my module. Okay, I have one CPU, but I will duplicate it, and I will even triplicate it. I have 3 different, CPUs instead of 1, 3 copies of them. They're all doing the same thing, right? And then I can take the outputs from the CPUs and I can put a voter to see if they are all giving the same output. Okay, so that is what a voter is. So here I have taken a, just for illustration purpose, I have taken a 5 to 1 voter, 5 input majority voter, right? So what are the inputs? It's remember the Verilog syntax. Okay, you have X, which is an input, right? It has 5 bits, 0 to 4, and Y is the output, which is a 1-bit output. And inside this module, I'm trying to describe this module. And you see in Verilog, unfortunately, when we write these always blocks that we write, Sometimes there may be a confusion about whether we are designing a combinational logic block or whether we are using a flip-flop based realization of this. See, I could easily do this as a sequential logic also, right? What prevents me from using a sequential realization of a majority vote? I can do that, right? But if I want to insist that this should be a combinational logic module, then Verilog did not have any such construct. So they have introduced this always comb, always flip-flop, right? And always latch to distinguish between these always blocks, right? It will continue to also support always, right? Because it is compatible to Verilog. So Verilog descriptions are also accepted by a system Verilog compiler, but not the other way around, right? So always comb is a way to say that this realization should be used in a please realize this using a combinational logic, right? And what are we doing? We are initializing an integer called s to 0, and we are going from 0 to 5, 0 to 4. And we are going to add all these values. So suppose the values are 1 0 0 1 1. So I'm going to count the number of bits which are set to 1. Okay, in this example the answer will be 3, right? And then there is another assign statement here, right, which takes that value s that you have computed, and if it is more than 2 it will give a 1. Otherwise it will give a 0. So this is how the majority voter has been implemented, right? So remember, this is called as behavioral description, and some people call this as data flow, and we can mix them up in order to create a. So this is a design. Okay, so this is typically in a separate file. Okay, this should be written to a file called majority.v or something like that, or SV. So system Verilog files have an extension of .sv, right? So let us say I have a file called majority.sv, and I have another file which has a test bench, right? In this case, it looks a lot like a Verilog test bench, except that in a Verilog you may be used to things like reg, right? You may have used the reg construct to declare a register. So A is a register, right? But in this example, I have used a system Verilog construct called logic, right? Similarly, in Verilog, you may have used wire as a construct, right? And in verification, often this can be an irritation, right? Reg and which should be reg, which should be wire. So people have faced a lot of frustration, right? So Verilog, system Verilog decided to be generous, and they introduced this concept called logic, and you can just interchange it with reg or wire, right? So just say it's a logic. It's a logic signal. So A is a 5-bit logic signal, and out is a 1-bit logic signal. So this is a new thing in system Verilog. So here I am instantiating one copy of Major5. Major5 is the name of the design module, and M5 is an instance of Major5. And the input to that Major5 is A, which I have declared here, and the output is the out symbol. And what does the test bench do? The test bench will have these statements like initial. So if you find statements like initial, it clearly means it's a test bench. Okay, you should not put those statements inside a design. Okay, so please understand, test bench is different, design is different. Design is something that we can synthesize, whereas test benches are only meant for simulation. Okay, I hope this is a very important point. I hope you understood it. Similarly, if you see things like this pound sign usually means a delay, right? These things should only be part of your test bench. They should not be part of your design, right? See, I don't have any pound sign here. I don't have any of those things, right? What am I doing here? I have two initial statements. I could have as well put them in the same one, doesn't matter. I'm doing it on purpose. If I put a number of these initial statements, they all begin execution at the same time. So it is like two concurrent processes. The first process simply initiates a monitor where I'm monitoring the time, right, at which things are happening. It's an event-driven simulation, so I need to understand at what time a particular event occurred. And it also tells me what the value of A is and what the value of out is. Okay. $time is a system variable which the simulator has access to. So I can print the system variable called $time, and A and B are my variables which I have declared here, right? And finally, there is the actual testing. What am I doing in a testing? This is an exhaustive testing. Okay, I know that with 5 inputs, there can be 32 combinations. So I am sort of simply going through every possible value. So from 0 to 32, I will test it for every case. If I take a larger majority voter, it may become difficult to test it exhaustively like this. But I'm just giving you a simple example to bring out some aspects of system Verilog. So system Verilog is also available for design, only a subset of it will be available, right? So the advantage is things like this interface will raise the level of abstraction, right? So some people do use system Verilog for design also, but remember only a subset of system Verilog is meant for design, right? And these are the things that are available for making verification easier, right? And these are all activities that we do as part of test bench creation. We have to generate the stimuli and apply it to the device under test. Okay, device under test, maybe we can call it DUV, design under verification, right? We have to capture the response, check whether they are expected, they are matching, and then we also need to worry about coverage. So these are some data types that system Verilog allows. Some of them were also present in Verilog. See, reg, integer, and real, they were also available in Verilog. But system Verilog allows a lot of other data types. Okay, see, for example, short int is like your short in C language, which is a 16-bit realization, right? And it has only 2 states, meaning it can you see, if I have a short integer, right? See, I can have 0, 0, 0, 0. 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0. So this is a possible value, right? So each of the bits has only 2 states, either a 0 or a 1. So that is what I mean by. On the other hand, if I have declared something as an integer, right, then in addition to 0 and 1, it can also have values like 0. I can also have 0, x, 0, 1, z, 0, 0, 0. So these are additional states that are possible, right? X means an unknown state. Okay, when we declare something as a register, unless we put some value in it, it will have an unknown state, right? Similarly, if a wire is not connected to anything, it will be in a high impedance state or the Z state, right? So why did the system Verilog provide both 2-state and 4-state logic? The advantage of 2-state logic is it is faster, right? The simulation will go faster, whereas in Verilog, they were only using this 4-state logic. 4 states are 0, 1, x, and z, and as you can imagine, it will take more number of bits also. See, if I have to encode 4 states, I will need 2 bits, right? So I will require more storage, and it will take longer to do the simulation, etc. So that is why they have introduced two-state logic, right? I already told you about logic, right? This logic thing. Let me just see if I can bring up my. How do I bring that? Never mind. So you already know about logic. In the same way, bit is also there. See, logic is a 4-state, whereas bit is 2-state. So if I'm sure in this example, if I'm really, I could have used bit here, because I am never going to use X, etc. So there is nothing wrong if I use a bit here. In fact, my simulation may go faster if I use a bit here. Yeah, I can also declare a byte, int, long int. So all the 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit, 64-bit, they're all available, right? You can also have a real, which is typically 64 bits, right? You can have a short real, which is 32 bits. And you can also have time, which is already available in Verilog, and there is also something called as the real time, right? And the other construct that they have allowed in Verilog, I'm sorry, System Verilog is something like this. See, let me quickly illustrate it for you. In Verilog, if I say, let us say reg 0 to 3 x to 3. Okay, let us say 0 to. So this 0:3, this range operator is appearing in 2 places. Okay. So this means in Verilog the following. It means that X is a register array. It has 2 registers. Okay, and each of them is 4 bits. So it will look like this. Okay. So this is what your. So this is X, the X0 register, and this is the X1 register. Okay, and within that there are 4 bits. Okay, this is what Verilog allows, right? The same thing is allowed here. So I have given an example of how you can initialize a register A, which is 32 bits. Okay. Here I took the most significant bit as 0 and the least significant bit as 3, but I can reverse it. Right. And this is how we initialize stuff. We are saying I want this A, which is a 32-bit register, to be initialized to the following hexadecimal value. This H means hexadecimal, and the value is A, B, C, D, E, F, 0, 1. Okay. E is 1110, F is 1111, and so on, right? There is also a two-dimensional array or multi-dimensional array that is allowed. This is not allowed in your Verilog. Okay, this is a pure system Verilog concept. Okay, so here I am saying n is a two-dimensional array. So this will have a dimension of 2 for the first dimension, and it will have 3 in the other dimension. So there are 6 integers. Okay, and they are being initialized like this. Okay, so the initialization unfortunately requires this quote. Okay, and this is a way to initialize a two-dimensional array. Okay, the first one has 0, 1, 2. Okay, and the second one has 4 repeated 3 times. Okay, if I want to repeat the same value 3 times, I can use this shortcut. Okay, and so on. Right, here is another example where I have given there are 12 integers organized as a 2 by 6 array, right? And to initialize it, here is what we are doing. We are saying something is repeated twice, okay, because there are two here, right? So this is being repeated twice. And what is it that is being repeated? This 4, 5 is being repeated 3 times. So this is what it is really doing. Okay, this is a shortcut way of describing something like this. Okay, this can be useful if your initialization patterns are pretty complicated and you don't want to really write down a lot of zeros and ones. So this makes the life of a verification engineer a little bit more easier, right? In addition to this, they have also allowed structured data types from C language. You may be familiar with this. See, for example, if I want to introduce a complex as a structure, suppose in some application, I have a complex number, right? And it has a real part and a imaginary part. And for some reason, the real part is integer and the real part is, the imaginary part is a 32-bit floating point number, right? I'm just making it up, right? It doesn't have to be in short real. I'm just making it up. So if you want to create something like that, you can create this type definition. In future, you can refer to this complex as a new data type. So you can say complex C. So C will have inside it an integer and a short real. So, and here is how you can initialize it. Okay, so this one will now go into C.A and this C.B will have 2.5. Okay, you can also create an array, right, of complex numbers after you have defined and so on, right? If you want to put default values, you can say :0, etc. Okay, when you declare a complex number, sometimes you can say integer A:0. This means by default put the value 0, right? It will make the code a little bit slower because you have to put that initialization, but sometimes it will help you to debug better, right? You should also know a little bit about packed and unpacked arrays, right? So what I showed you earlier, this one, okay, if I only had this would be a packed array, okay. So here is an example of a packed array. So what the simulator will possibly do is it will use a 8-bit something like this. Okay, so maybe it will use a byte inside your CPU to simulate this particular packed array. Okay, so if the value was 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay, so this will be inside a single 8-bit register. Okay, but if you declare it like this, okay, this 7:0 has been, then it becomes what is called as an unpacked. So it will look like this. Okay, it will look like this. So unfortunately, we are storing only 1 bit here. So our intention is to store only 1 bit, right? But we ended up using this unpacked array. So all these bits, it may be actually using a whole register to store only 1 bit, right? So it's a little wasteful, right? But access will be faster, right? So there is a little bit of a trade-off here between when you use packed and when you use unpacked arrays. Okay. I don't have a opportunity to ask whether you're understanding or not, but I'm going on, assuming that you're catching on. I told you earlier about interfaces, right? So here is a example of the same majority voter, right? So look at this majority voter. Earlier, I had explicitly said that it requires a 5 input bus and a 1 output bus, 1 bit output bus. But I can declare it as an interface. Okay. In fact, I can make it programmable. I can say, hey, I want a parameter called BW, which is a bus width. And by default, I want it to be 8. Okay, and I can change this later. Right. So I have declared something called as an interface, and the name of this interface is INTF. Okay, and it's a parameterized definition. Right. By default, this parameter BW is 8. And there is also a clock which is part of this interface. Okay, clock is already declared outside. Then inside, in addition to the clock, it has got a data and some majority. Okay, so this is the maybe it could be input data and this could be the output data or something like that. Okay, so if you write this interface, end interface, right, and in system Verilog you are allowed to create this colon as a sort of a aid for readability. Okay, you can say end interface colon INTF. Similarly, I could say end module, right, and I can say colon so this will make the code a little bit more readable, right? So similarly here I can say colon test and so on. This interface, what is the advantage? See, this is the, if I have two different people, right? One person is writing the design for the majority voter, and the other person is writing the input. Now, if benches, if let us say he by chance interchange these two, right? The majority is first and the data, then they will not be correct, right? I mean, the whole thing will go wrong. So you are testing it incorrect, right? You are complaining that the majority voter is failing, but it is actually all right, right? So to avoid such problems, both the designer and the verification engineer will use the same interface. See, this also uses the same INTF major bus, and this also uses INTF major bus. Okay, and this code will be common. Okay, this will be present in, there will be 3 files now. Okay, maybe we can call this as intf.v. This will be called majority.v, and there will be one more file called test majority.v. And this intf.v will be included in both of them. So both of them will include this, and as a result, they are using the same interface, and there is not going to be any confusion. Is that clear? So you can see that here we are using the same exhaustive testing. Okay, and this time we don't know how big the majority bus is. It could be maybe BW is the maximum bus width. So we are calculating, this 2 to the bits, right? We are calculating 2 to the power 1 minus 2 to the power n minus 1 here, and we are doing this. Okay. exhaustive testing, right? And similarly here also we are calculating we are counting the number of bits which are set to 1, and then frankly this 4 is not quite correct. 4 is only true for BW, for the default value. You should change it to, instead of 4, whatever that BW is. It should have been BW divided by 2. Okay, that is the correct implementation, right? So I just showed you how design errors can occur, right? So hopefully you followed this exercise. Okay. And there are a lot of other constructs provided, right, to help the verification engineer, right? A lot of different data types, right? So string is a very common data type, so maybe I should go to string first. Okay. See, string is a data type in this system Verilog, which was not present in your Verilog. And if you declare an object as a string, see, it's sort of object oriented. If you declare S1 as a string like this, then you can ask for functions that apply to that particular string. So you can look for a substring, right? You can look for the length. Okay, so that is what is the power of system Verilog, right? So in here is these are some of the so here I can declare a string called my name, okay, and I can initialize it like this. See, it is so easy to do it like this. We could not do something very simple like this in Verilog, right? So they have made it easy in system Verilog. You can find the length of a string, right? When will you do all this? You will only do it in verification. See, there is no equivalent of this in design, right? You can take a specific bit position and put a character there using putc. You can read a specific the character in a specific position. You can convert everything to uppercase, lowercase, compare two strings, right? You can also do case insensitive comparison. You can do you can take substring between I and j, positions I and j. You can convert an ASCII into integer, ASCII to real. So you see all this stuff that typically would have taken a lot of coding in Verilog, right? If we did not have all this built in, then we will end up creating all this in our own time. So it saves a lot of time for the verification engineer, and the chance of bugs also is reduced, right? I mean, what if we make a bug in the verification itself? So that is the advantage of system Verilog, right? So there are a lot of other data types. So string is one of them, and here I am trying to tell you how we can create a sort of an associative array. Okay. So here is what the associative array looks like. Okay. So I have created a string. I have created a associative array, and the name of that array is database. That is the name. Okay. And by putting the value string here like this, it means that each entry of this is a string. Okay. And how do I initialize it? I am saying this is a lookup table. The value 1 will be converted to 1. The value 2 will be converted to 2. And the value default will be converted to none. Right. So here is how I have okay. So this is a string to string mapping. Okay, so here is the way you can imagine this. So it's a mapping. So it takes a string as input, right, and produces another string. That is what is, you know, a mapping. Okay. I need not have a string to string mapping. I could do something else. For example, here is another example. It's a mapping of the name of the associative array is lookup, right? It maps a 4-bit number to another 4-bit number. I'm sorry, it maps a 4-bit number to a 5-bit number. Okay, so this is a 5-bit number and this is a 4-bit number. Okay. Where will that be useful? Maybe you are designing a lookup table, right? See, for example, you want to calculate sine of an angle, right? And you are coding the angle as a 8-bit number, right? You have come up with a coding mechanism, right? It can go from, if you have an 8-bit number, it can go from -127 to plus 127, or -128 to plus 127 in 2's complement. And you have divided the maybe minus 180 to plus 180. So you have some way of coding, right? So you could have written, right, something like this. Okay, you would have declared logic 7:0. So this is your 8-bit number which has the angle, right? And your associative array is a sine. And let us say the sine is stored with, let us say, 6-bit precision. Okay. So if you write like this, then you are saying that I have a lookup table called sine, which takes an 8-bit angle and generates a 6-bit sine output. And if I have declared this as a type definition, right, I can use a type def to avoid writing logic 5 to 0. I can say sine type, and I can say angle type. (7:0), etc. Right. So that is how you can make your life a little bit more easier, right? And there are some operations available on associative arrays, right? So for example, when I write like this, okay, I'm sort of saying that with the value 0 associate the value 1. Okay, in my example here, see, suppose the sine of 0 is 0, right? Let me. So I'll have to say something like this. Sine of 0 is 0. Okay. If I wanted the following angle, if the angle is, let us say, AA. Okay. AA is a 8-bit number, okay, and it may correspond to a certain angle, and you have gone ahead and calculated the angle, the sine of that angle, right, to be some negative number, and you have encoded it as let us say a 6-bit number. Okay, something like this, right? So you can do things like this to initialize the lookup table, right? Then you can also here is a string database being initialized. Okay, this is an associative array which takes a string as input and gives a string as output. $display, you will remember, is a system function, right? And you can count the number of elements in the lookup array. Okay, so lookup.num gives you the number of values currently in the lookup table, right? So the more numbers you add, the more it'll so you don't have to keep track of how many are already there, etc. So if you did not have all these advantages, then your code will be very long. It will take a lot of. You can delete a value, right, from the lookup table. You can find which is the first entry in the lookup table, right? And you can find the next value, right, and so on. You can write loops where you keep accessing all the elements of the lookup table and things like that. So this is only for verification purpose. Let me warn you, it is not that I can start synthesizing this code. There is no equivalent of that. Where is it useful? Maybe, you know, when you are doing verification, right? It is very painful to read zeros and ones and try to make sense out of them, right? Maybe you want to know what is really happening out there, right? Maybe, you know, this pattern doesn't make any sense to you, AA, right? Instead, maybe you want to know the actual value that is there, right? So that is where lookup tables like this, you know, can be very useful, right? So that is what associative arrays are, right? So any questions, feel free to ask right now. I'll give you a couple of minutes to ask any questions. Has anybody any questions so far? Can you raise your hand?
Yes, sir. I think few of them have already asked in the chat box.
Okay, okay. Where are they?
I think, sir, for the raise hand, just below that, you can, I mean, just beside.
Yeah. Can we say that in system Verilog we operate at a higher level of abstraction as compared to Verilog? Yes and no. See, I can take system Verilog and write Verilog code there. See, it is something like C++, right? A lot of people learn C++, but they're only writing C code inside C++. So I can't say that system Verilog code is always at a higher level of abstraction, but certainly, right? It allows you a more powerful expression. See, I can't say it is a level of abstraction is different. What I can say is you can write very which are much more complex. So this question is from Ankita. Then I see another question. Anusha, I couldn't attend the first half of the class due to technical issue. Okay. There are good references for system Verilog. There is a very good book. I will send that information to Professor Sahula and he can share that with you. No other questions. I only saw one question.
Maybe if anybody is having, then they can raise your hand and we can take them up one by one.
Feel free to ask anything that I said. You know, in the beginning, I also gave a few. What are the rules that need to be kept in mind for design files?
Sai Sandeep has some question.
No, I have seen from Aniruddha. Aniruddha has given what are the rules that need to be kept in mind for design files. It's a very good question. See, there are a lot of design rules. I can't unfortunately point out one of them, but let me give you an example. See, a very common error is, you know, it used to be like this. So let me sort of quickly illustrate that for you. See, I know, this always block you may not remember. See, this is known as a sensitivity list, right? X, Y, Z are the part of the sensitivity list. So if any one of the signals were to change, we are supposed to enter this block and do whatever computation that is required to be done. A common error is to overdo this design block. See, suppose I also add a few other signals, right? This code has nothing to do with W. Right? W is not present anything. It's not even mentioned here. But maybe the designer was copying some code from a previous block or doing something like that, and he forgot to edit this part, and it remains like that, right? So the system, the compiler will unfortunately think that W is an input, right? And it is not being updated here, so it should remember that value, right? So it will try to remember that value by using a latch, right? So that is a common error that occurs in design, right? So in Verilog, people were constantly told that, hey, don't put signals that you don't use in the block, etc., because it will imply latches. In System Verilog, you can avoid this entirely. You can say always begin. It can figure it out by itself. It will imply or infer the what is called as a sensitivity list by itself. Okay, it will look at the code that you have written between always begin and this begin and end, and whatever you are putting inside the if, etc., those must be the signals which must be part of the sensitivity list. Okay, so this was an improvement in System Verilog, major improvement. Okay, so those are the kind of design errors that typically used to happen. The other design error that used to happen was miscommunication. Data is going from least significant byte to this, right? I mean, there are two methods to store a 32-bit number, isn't it? In a memory, which is suppose I have okay. See, a 32-bit number has to be stored in a array of 4 bytes. Okay, so I can store MS B1, B0, B1, B2, B3. I store it like this, and this is my most significant byte, and this is the least significant byte. If I store like this, right, that is one form of storage. The other is B0, B1, B2, B3. Okay, so if we are not careful, right, the input was in let us say big Endian format, and we had assumed that it was a little Endian format. So major functional error, right? But with this interface and other mechanisms that are available, we can try to reduce those errors also. So there is a lot of literature on all this. See, there are a lot of good, see, one of the things you should, if you are serious about verification, then follow these groups. For example, there is a these EDA vendors like Cadence and Synopsys, Mentor Graphics. They all conduct their annual events, right? And as part of that, they publish the proceedings, tutorials, papers, And the users of these tools, they tend to publish papers based on the practice. Okay, whatever good design practices, etc. So those are the best sources where you will find a lot of these. Okay. So I hope. Suppose I have to work on FPGA, then which is good to use Verilog? It doesn't matter, right? Usually the tool vendors, if you are buying it from Xilinx or whatever, they will support Verilog as well as VHDL simulation. So use whichever, it doesn't really matter. Okay, but if you are planning to use system Verilog, then it's your verification becomes really easier. Right? Does the string data type take ASCII values? Yes, it takes ASCII values. Like in other languages, we give words with indexes while, just a minute, Ankita, does the string data type use ASCII values? Like in other languages, we give words with indexes while, yeah, it is the same thing. See, it is like, I told you, right? System Verilog is trying to copy aspects of C, C++, etc. So they have made life easier by allowing you to use ASCII strings and so on. Could you elaborate a bit on UV and OVM? I will do it. I will do it in my, I think I have one more class. I will keep this for that. This is from Wilfred Kisku. I will, UVM is Universal Verification Methodology. I will, yeah. What else? Any other questions? So I hope I have initiated you today a little bit into what the problems we see in Verilog verification code written in Verilog. The verification code used to be itself very lengthy, right? And when you write lengthy code, bugs will occur, right? So both in design and verification, bugs can occur. And if the Verilog verification code itself has bugs, then there is a lot of problem, right? I mean, you are pointing out errors which are not there, or you are missing out errors which are there. So both are bad. System Verilog is implemented in many commercial tools, right? Unfortunately, I can't recommend any open source tools for System Verilog. I can't illustrate to you these constructs which I am talking about. A very small subset of them may be available in iVerilog, right? The Icarus Verilog. We're not aware of any public domain tools which support System Verilog, right? But if you are aware of any, please experiment with those, not a problem. Verilog code will also run as System Verilog. That is what I was trying to tell you, right? It is a superset, right? To be backward compatible, they allow Verilog code to be simulated as part of System Verilog. So if you write reg, wire, etc., they will also work. Okay, but take advantage of things like logic, bit, etc., which I told you, and avoid having to write those things. Right. There is also somebody asked me about levels of abstraction. You can also write mixed signal descriptions in Verilog, what we call as Verilog A and Verilog, analog and mixed signal, AMS, Verilog AM, Verilog AMS and Verilog A. These are also nowadays supported. So sometimes when you go to industry, you will be asked to write, there may be a to D converter, right? And you have to test it, right? You have to see whether it is functionally correct or whether it gives the correct values, etc., etc. So that is another place where you may need the knowledge of System Verilog, right? What else?
I think, sir, one of the candidates, Sai Sandeep, has raised his hand.
Oh, Okay.
Sai Sandeep, if you can hear us, then you can unmute your mic and you can ask the question. Sai Sandeep. I'm not sure. Maybe he is.
I think he may have left because maybe also a network itself is sometimes not good, right? So
Okay, sir. I think there are, sir, other question in a chat box probably, sir. If you can just look at that again, that I think Aniruddha has some question regarding.
no, here's the Sai Sandeep has sent. What are the functions mainly used in the programming?
Okay, Sai Sandeep has written yes.
What are the functions mainly used in the programming? I'm not able to understand what Sai Sandeep is asking here. See,
Sai Sandeep, if you can unmute your mic and you can directly ask the question to sir, we can take it because we are not able to actually understand the question.
Meanwhile, I'll see there is one more question from Aniruddha. Can design files be synthesized without any changes after it passes test bench? No, not. Good question, right? There are some a file which is meant for design, right, should not have things like delays and things like that, right? So unfortunately, the simulation cannot figure that out, right? If your simulation passes, it doesn't mean that synthesis is also pass, right? So very good question from Aniruddha. So we want, if somebody has produced a Verilog code or system Verilog code intended for design, right? The simulator may be happy with it, right? But the synthesis tool may not understand because see, if you use a dollar display in a file, right, in a Verilog file or a system Verilog file, system Verilog will simply go and accept it, right? But dollar display has no synthesis equivalent, or dollar file open. Those things don't make any sense. Similarly, system tasks. Okay, dollar sign. See, today I told you that you can store a sign as a sign table, right? But system simulation will also allow dollar sign, dollar cause, etc. They are available, right? But what if some person knowingly or unknowingly calculated the sign and cause using the system built-in functions and displayed them, right? So unfortunately, nobody will ever know, right? I can cheat someone, right, and use the built-in functions to do the sign and cause calculations. But reality was that this assignment was to, simulate the hardware, right? So you cannot figure that out. Only when you try to synthesize, you will know that there is a problem. Okay, good question. Even after the synthesis, see, all these tools, whether it is a simulation tool or a synthesis tool, they take us a little bit closer to silicon, and none of them can guarantee that that is what we really want, right? That is why that validation step is so important, right? Otherwise, there would have been no need for all those things, right? Errors can occur anywhere. Right? Functional bugs can occur, timing bugs can occur, right? And manufacturing defects can occur. So it's a error-prone process, and we have to try and minimize those errors. We can't ever guarantee that there are no problems, but we should try and minimize. What else, sir? Sai Sandeep, I'm not sure whether I fully understood your question. All these are available. System Verilog. Yes, sir.
Sir, sorry, this is Sai Sandeep. I'm not getting like here network connectivity is very low, so that's why I'm not getting. So I'm listening the class through mobile also. Hello.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sai Sandeep, we can hear you. Just ask your question if you have.
Okay, sir. In previous slide, you have told me that you have shown one programming. So in that, what are the main functions? For example, in C language and in like embedded language, there are many functions that has been used. So what are the main functions? Like, for example, we have taken in the C language, there are like, yeah, in the lookup function, like, no sir, previous slide. Yeah, this one, sir. No sir, back.
I think
Come
associative
back.
array, sir. Associative
Yeah,
array.
yes sir.
Okay.
Yeah, this slide, sir. So how these functions that has been used for this, not only for this, how these functions have been used, sir?
Okay. See, I think I can understand what you're asking. See, first of all, you should not consider this as a programming language, right? This is a hardware description language, and the test bench is initializing some hardware, right? So let me give you this example. See, this is an example of a majority voter, right? See, look at this is the test bench. Okay, this will be in a file called test.v, whereas this is a design.v. Okay, this is not a function call. This is an instantiation of a module, okay, called major file, and this is one instance. I can have multiple instances. Okay, you should look at it as hardware, right? And how do you breathe life into that hardware? You do it by using this test bench. Okay, it is not that in a programming language it is always in a sequence, right? We go from main program. The main program will have some statements, and then it may call functions. You will not find that here. So this is not a programming language. This is a hardware description language, and the signals are being provided as inputs, right? And depending on what the inputs are, the hardware will do some activities, right? It will kick in some computations, right? That's all that happens. It is not that there is some sort of a sequencing that is, I'm not giving any sequence here. Okay. It is all the hardware coexists. They're all present, and they will do something depending on how you are going to send the signals. Is that clear, Sai Sandeep?
Yes, sir.
You are from which college?
One question. Yes, sir. One question.
Hmm.
Here in for input majority, you have used a like one combination logic circuit.
Yeah.
How many combination logic circuit can we use in one hardware description language? I mean, here you have used.
There is no limit. There is no limit. There is no limit.
Okay,
you can use as many as you want.
Okay, sir.
Okay, you can use as many. That is what I was trying to tell you. If you are looking at them as functions in a software language, this may be a function, right? But there is a slight difference. This is a module that it is like an IC chip that you buy, right? I can buy 10 of them and instantiate that to form a bigger circuit, right? So I can go to the market, right? And I can ask for 10 copies of a particular NAND gate or something like that, and I can instantiate them and I can connect them in a certain way, and then I can give some inputs. That is the kind of thing that is going on here. Okay, it is not that we have a sequencing that is being dictated by the test bench. The sequencing is indirectly dictated by giving input signals. See, remember what I told you in the beginning. See, there is a barrier. This is a verification engineer, and this is these are the design files. See, all the intelligent logic, etc., is inside here. We are only trying to see whether it does what it promises to do. You understand? If I do a reset, right, does the output become 0? If I, after doing a reset, if I send 3 clocks, does some other signal become 1 or whatever, right? So that is what we are testing. We are not going to sequence this CPU. That is not our job. We are looking at it as a black box. We don't know what is inside that. Clear? So the person who writes
Yes,
a
sir.
test bench is not a programmer who knows what is happening inside. No, he only knows how the program behaves. See, if you have written a program for sorting, right? You have done some programming exercises like sorting and all that, right?
But sir, but we can edit the program. I mean,
No,
we can
no, you are not
access.
allowed to do that. No, 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 no.
Yes,
A
sir.
verification engineer will have no edit access to all these files. He is
Sir,
not
once the
supposed to.
program has been fixed, it has been that we can't
Yeah,
edit.
yeah. Otherwise, it will be chaos, right? See, Sai Sandeep, in an industry, there are designers who are able to edit these files. Once they give the design to the verification engineer, the verification engineer is looking at them as black box. He has no right access to any of these files. If
Okay,
he
sir.
starts editing these files, it will result in complete chaos. Okay. See, the designer himself, you understand, the designer, when he developed the design, he wrote his own test benches, right? That is a different matter. When I am debugging my own design, I may do a little bit of testing myself. For that, I may write a test bench. But that is not the kind of testing that I am talking about. I am talking about what verification engineers do, right? That is more serious business. The CPU developer, the designer, he ran a few test cases, right, to verify, right? Hopefully, he also has debugged and figured out a lot of problems and fixed them. But the verification engineer, he is more like a, you know, he's trying to be the devil's advocate and says, yes, there is a bug. He believes that there is a bug in the system and tries to expose it. He
Sir,
doesn't get any
once.
credit. See, the CPU guy is trying to prevent any bugs from showing up, right? Whereas this guy is trying to expose them. Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, for example, is there any error in that programming? But and how can we solve that problem, sir? Once is there any like problem?
It's a back and forth process. See,
Okay.
the person who designed the CPU or any other design, that person would have already done some testing and he has delivered it to the team, right? Now, when the verification happens, they will write down all the bugs that are coming. They will say this particular case failed. I expected such and such an output, but I got a different output. So there will be a verification report like that. And that will be now the design team will go and look at it and they will argue whether it is true or not. They will suspect that the verification itself may be having a problem or whatever, right? So it is not clear whether the verification guy has by chance
Okay, sir.
incorrectly pointed out a problem. But ultimately, once they debug what the problem is, it may be that the design actually had a problem. Then they'll fix it, right? And then it comes back. And again, this verification test bench will be run. And again, they will check whether this time some other test bench may fail. Okay, whatever was passing earlier may now fail because the designer fixed something and that may upset something else. Okay,
Okay, sir.
so it's a very laborious process, right? Finally,
Okay.
when all the test benches pass, that is when we say that it is it's clean to the best of our knowledge. So again, like I told you, we can never exhaustively test anything, but assuming that our verification engineers did a great job by thinking of all possible test cases, things that can go wrong. Okay, take this this event that we are doing, right? I mean, the MNIT team has imagined all possible scenarios. What if Ravi Kumar could not connect? How to help? What happens when a chat question is asked? What if he cannot read? So they would have thought of all these scenarios and they would have come up with some mechanisms to handle that problem. The same way, we are also trying to catch various situations that can arise, and we are exposing the possibilities of error.
Yes.
I think Sai Sandeep, I think it's. I think you hope you are getting your answer. Okay.
Yes, sir. Sir, last one question. Sir, actually have said that in backend to find the error. So in backend they will check the error. Is there any software required to check the error? I mean, in the backend process, backend engineers, is there any software to find out the errors? Is there any software using?
There are a lot of tools. There are a lot of tools. See, if you are referring to design rule errors, let us say layout verification rules, right? See, errors could be because somebody did a custom layout, right? A certain, especially analog layout, is usually done as a custom layout, and I may be violating some design rules, or I may be violating some electrical rules. So there are tools which will, tell you that there is a design rule violation. The separation between two metal is too short. Yes, there are rules there are rule checkers like that. There are also rule checkers at the RTL level. See, if somebody gives you RTL, there are what are called as linting tools that will tell you that this is not good writing. Just like in C code, right? See, in C code, you are familiar with the problem, right? If A equals B. Right? What is the correct way to say if A double equal to B? Right? If you write if A equal to B in C language, it's a bug, right? But maybe some, maybe some particular, programmer he wrote it like that. It is a correct program, but it is written like that. If A equals and some function, right? If you write such code, right, there is a warning that gets issued saying, hey, you are doing something here. Can you rewrite this code? This is not a good practice, right? Separate that A equal to statement from a as a separate statement, and then check the status of that result, right? So these are called linting tools, and they are also available. So in the design environment, there are a lot of tools for trying to help the designers to find out if there are errors.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I think if there are no more questions, then probably
we can stop the session today, I think, right?
Yes, sir.
So I have a session tomorrow, 10 to 12.
Yes, sir.
All right.